After 20 years of his death, I was arranging fresh peonies on Robert's memorial bench when I saw him walking across the cemetery lawn. Not a ghost. Not a dream. My husband, 20 years after I'd buried him, alive and holding another woman's hand. The peonies fell from my fingers, scattering across the dewy grass. My heart seemed to stop, then restart with painful intensity. I gripped the edge of the bench, the one with the brass plaque reading Robert James Sullivan, beloved husband, 1968 to 2005, to steady myself. He was thinner now, his once dark hair streaked with silver, but the way he moved was unmistakable. That slight tilt of the head when he listened. The gesture of his right hand as he spoke. Even from 50 yards away, I knew. The woman beside him was petite, with caramel-colored hair pulled back in an elegant knot. She wore a cream linen dress and walked with the confident grace of someone who had never questioned her place in the world or in his life. I ducked behind a large oak tree, my hands trembling as I watched them approach a grave several rows away. 20 years of grief crashed against 20 seconds of impossible reality. Robert was alive. Robert was here. Robert was with someone else. And he was walking straight toward the grave I had visited faithfully every month for 2 decades. I should have stepped forward. I should have screamed his name. I should have demanded explanations for the 20 years of birthdays, anniversaries, and Christmas mornings I'd spent alone. Instead, I ran. As I fumbled with my car keys, I glimpsed them in my rearview mirror. The man I had loved and lost, kneeling beside his own empty grave with a stranger's comforting hand on his shoulder. Robert and I met in our late 30s, when most of our friends were nursing midlife crises or teenage children. We were both late bloomers in love, me because of a career that consumed my 20s and 30s, him because of what he called waiting for the real thing. "I knew you were the one," he told me on our 3rd date, "because you laugh before the punchline. You've already connected the dots while everyone else is still looking for them." Our courtship was brief but certain. We married within a year, built a craftsman-style home in the Seattle suburbs, and settled into the kind of companionable love I'd always doubted existed. He was an environmental engineer who traveled frequently for work, measuring water quality in developing countries. I ran a small but successful bookstore that specialized in travel literature. We were happy, until the call came from Brazil. "There's been an accident," the voice on the phone said. "A boating accident on the Amazon." "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Sullivan." They never found his body, just his backpack washed up on a muddy shore, his wallet and passport still inside. The local authorities searched for weeks before declaring him presumed dead. I argued, pleaded, hired private investigators who eventually told me the same thing. No one could have survived those rapids, that remote location, those elements. So I buried an empty casket and planted a garden of his favorite flowers around a memorial bench where I could sit and feel close to him. I spoke to him about my day, about the books I was reading, about the changing seasons. I kept our home exactly as he had left it, his coffee mug still hanging on its hook in the kitchen, his reading glasses on the nightstand. Years passed. Friends encouraged me to date. Family suggested I move to be closer to them. But Seattle was where we had built our life, and I couldn't leave the only place where I still felt his presence. For 20 years, I lived in the after. After Robert. After happiness. After certainty. I ran the bookstore, traveled occasionally, made a comfortable life, but always with the awareness of what was missing, who was missing. Until today, when the missing returned. It took me 3 days to work up the courage to return to the cemetery. I told myself I had imagined him, a grief hallucination triggered by the anniversary of his disappearance. But I knew what I had seen. This time, I came prepared. I brought photos of us, our marriage certificate, news clippings about the accident, evidence of our life together, of his death, proof that I wasn't losing my mind. I sat on the memorial bench for hours, watching visitors come and go, jumping at every approaching figure. Just as I had convinced myself he wouldn't return, a taxi pulled up to the cemetery gates. He emerged alone this time, paid the driver, and stood for a long moment looking at the rows of headstones as if gathering courage. Then he began walking directly toward me. I couldn't run now. My legs wouldn't move. 20 years of questions rooted me to the spot as he approached, his eyes widening with recognition when he was about 30 feet away. Claire. His voice was exactly as I remembered, perhaps slightly rougher with age. Robert. I managed to say his name, though it felt foreign on my tongue after so many years of only whispering it to his memory. He stopped a few feet from the bench, from his own memorial, looking at me with an expression I couldn't read. Not guilt, not love, something more complex. You're alive, I said stupidly. Yes. He glanced at the bench at his name engraved in brass. This is surreal. Surreal. I stood up, anger suddenly replacing shock. 20 years, Robert. 20 years I thought you were dead. I mourned you. I buried you. And you're calling this surreal. He held up his hands as if to calm me. Claire, please. I can explain everything. Who is she? The question burst from me before I realized it was the one I most needed answered. His face softened. Her name is Isabella. She's my wife. The world tilted. Your wife? I'm your wife. Claire. No, I cut him off. No, you don't get to say my name like that. Like nothing happened. Like you didn't let me believe you were dead for 2 decades while you, what? Started a new life? With a new wife. A couple visiting a nearby grave glanced our way, and Robert lowered his voice. It's complicated. Can we go somewhere to talk? Please? I wanted to refuse, to storm away and pretend I'd never seen him. But 20 years of questions demanded answers. My car's over there, I said coldly. Follow me. We sat in a quiet corner of the cafe where Robert and I had spent countless Sunday mornings during our marriage. The irony wasn't lost on me. Same table, same man, different lifetime. Start talking, I said, wrapping my hands around a mug of tea I couldn't bring myself to drink. Robert looked older up close, fine lines around his eyes, deeper creases alongside his mouth. But his eyes were the same warm brown I'd fallen in love with a lifetime ago. The accident happened like they told you, he began. Our boat capsized in the rapids. I was thrown clear, but I hit my head on something, a rock, a log, I don't know. When I woke up, I was in a village miles downstream. No identification, no memory of who I was. I stared at him in disbelief. Amnesia? That's your explanation? Like some soap opera plot? I know how it sounds, he said, looking down at his untouched coffee. But it's the truth. I had no memory of my life before the accident. Not my name, not my work, not you. For how long? 3 years, maybe 4. It came back in pieces. Random images, feelings, disconnected memories. The villagers called me Joao because I couldn't tell them my name. I worked as a laborer, helping with construction, farming, whatever was needed. And you never thought to contact the American embassy? To try to figure out who you were? The village was remote, Claire. No electricity, no phones. The nearest city was a 2-day journey by boat. And I wasn't sure I wanted to remember. Something told me there was pain in my past. I laughed bitterly. The pain was mine, Robert. All mine. He nodded slowly. I know that now. And I'm so sorry. When did you remember? I asked, the question I'd been dreading. He hesitated. About 15 years ago. I was in Manaus by then, working as a guide for ecological tours. A tourist showed me a book about water conservation projects, and there was my name in the acknowledgments. Everything came flooding back. My work, my identity, us. 15 years. He had known who he was, who I was, for 15 years and had stayed away. And Isabella? I forced myself to ask. I met her in the city. She was a teacher. His face softened in a way that made my chest ache. By the time I remembered my past, we were already married with a daughter on the way. So you chose to stay dead, I said flatly. Claire. No, I understand perfectly. You had a new life, a new family. Coming back would have complicated things. Easier to let your first wife keep grieving, keep visiting an empty grave, keep talking to a memorial bench like a crazy woman. My voice broke on the last words. Robert reached across the table, but I pulled my hands away. It wasn't like that, he said. I was a different person by then. The man you married was gone. I had new responsibilities, a child coming. And I thought, I truly believed you would have moved on. Moved on? I echoed. How? There was no closure, Robert. No body. Just endless, tormenting hope that maybe, somehow, the authorities were wrong. That maybe you were still out there somewhere. I laughed bitterly. Turns out I was right. I'm so sorry, he whispered. Why are you here now? After all this time, Robert ran a hand through his silver-streaked hair, a gesture so familiar it made my heart contract. Our daughter, Lucia, is studying at the University of Washington. When Isabella and I came to help her move into her apartment, I needed to see. See what? If there was anything left of my old life. If anyone remembered me. He glanced away. If you were okay. And what did you discover? I asked coldly. That I hurt you beyond measure, he said quietly. That I made an unforgivable choice. We sat in silence, 20 years of separate lives stretching between us like an uncrossable chasm. Does she know? I finally asked. Your wife, does she know about me? Robert nodded. Yes. When my memory returned, I told her everything. She's the one who encouraged me to come here, to face the past. That's why she was with you at the cemetery. Yes. She knows I'm here with you now. I tried to imagine the conversation between them, this woman learning her husband had another wife, one who thought he was dead. The generosity it would take to support him in reconnecting with that past. Or perhaps it was confidence. The security of knowing she was the choice he had made. I'd like to meet her, I said suddenly, surprising myself. Robert looked startled. Are you sure? No, I admitted. But I need to. We arranged to meet the following evening at a restaurant overlooking Elliott Bay, neutral territory with enough ambient noise to buffer the awkwardness. I spent the day in a state of anxious preparation, changing clothes 4 times before settling on a simple blue dress Robert had always loved. Then I realized what I was doing, dressing to impress my dead husband and his new wife, and nearly called to cancel. But I needed this confrontation, this chance to look into the eyes of the woman who had lived the life that should have been mine. They were already seated when I arrived, at a table with a panoramic view of the water. Robert stood as I approached, but it was Isabella who extended her hand first. Claire, she said, her accent softening the edges of my name. Thank you for agreeing to meet us. Up close, she was striking rather than conventionally beautiful, high cheekbones, intelligent eyes, a quiet dignity in her posture. I guessed her to be in her early 50s, a few years younger than Robert and me. I had to see for myself, I said, accepting her handshake with what I hoped was composure. Of course. She gestured to the chair across from them. Please. We ordered wine, a Pinot Noir that Robert and I used to share on special occasions. I wondered if he remembered, if he'd chosen this restaurant because it had been one of our favorites. Robert tells me you own a bookstore, Isabella said after the waiter left. What kind of books do you sell? Travel narratives, mostly, I replied. Stories about places people dream of visiting but might never see. Like the Amazon, she said, her gaze direct but not unkind. Yes, I took a deep breath. Like the Amazon. Robert shifted uncomfortably between us. Claire's store is one of the best independent bookshops in Seattle. We used to. Robert, I interrupted gently, I'm not here to reminisce. He nodded, chastened. You're right. I'm sorry. Why did you want to meet me, Claire? Isabella asked, her directness refreshing amid the tension. I considered the question carefully, to understand how one man could be the center of 2 separate lives, to see the woman he chose to stay with when he remembered he had another option. It wasn't a choice between 2 women, Robert began, but Isabella touched his arm. It was exactly that, she said, surprising me. When Joao, Robert, remembered his past, we faced an impossible situation. He could return to his life with you, or continue the life he had built with me and our unborn daughter. And he chose you, I said, the words still bitter after all these years. No, Isabella said firmly. He chose our child. Lucia was the deciding factor. He couldn't abandon her before she was even born. I hadn't considered that perspective, that it wasn't me versus Isabella in Robert's decision, but rather the pull of impending fatherhood. It didn't lessen the pain, but it shifted the narrative I'd been constructing since seeing him at the cemetery. Tell me about her, I said. Your daughter. Their faces transformed as they spoke of Lucia, her intelligence, her passion for environmental conservation like her father, her adjustment to life in the Pacific Northwest. They showed me photos on their phones, a striking young woman with her mother's cheekbones and her father's thoughtful eyes. She doesn't know about me, does she? I asked. Robert and Isabella exchanged a glance. No, he admitted. We told her I had been married before, but that my wife had died. It seemed simpler. I laughed without humor. So I'm the dead spouse in your story. Ironic. The waiter arrived with our entrees, providing a momentary reprieve from the tension. As we ate, the conversation shifted to safer topics: Seattle's changes over the years, Brazil's environmental challenges, books we had read. It was surreal, making polite dinner conversation with my husband and the woman who had taken my place in his life. When dessert arrived, a tiramisu we agreed to share, Isabella set down her fork and looked at me intently. There is something I need to say to you, Claire, she began. What happened to you is cruel and unfair. Even though Robert made his choice for our daughter, I have carried the weight of your loss all these years. I know what it is to love him. Her voice caught slightly, so I can imagine what it was to lose him. I am deeply sorry for your pain. Her sincerity undid me. Tears I had been holding back spilled over, streaming down my face as I struggled to maintain composure. Thank you, I managed finally. That means something. Robert reached across the table, and this time I didn't pull away when he took my hand. I made a terrible mistake in not finding some way to let you know I was alive, Claire. I convinced myself it was kinder to let you move on, that reappearing would only reopen wounds. I was a coward. Yes, I agreed, you were. The three of us sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 2 decades of parallel lives pressing down on us. What happens now? I asked finally. 3 months after that impossible dinner, I stood on the deck of my bookstore's new cafe edition, watching the autumn leaves drift onto the patio below. The expansion had been my project since July. Something to focus on besides the upheaval of discovering my dead husband was very much alive. Robert and Isabella had returned to Brazil after helping Lucia settle into university life, but not before several more conversations that gradually transformed from painful confrontations to something approaching closure. I learned about Robert's life in the Amazon, about the environmental education center he and Isabella had established, about the man he had become in his second life. I told them about my years alone, about keeping the bookstore going through economic downturns and the rise of ebooks, about the grief support group I eventually led for others facing ambiguous loss. We exchanged stories like traders bartering precious goods, each offering pieces of the years the other had missed. The bell above the bookstore door chimed, and I turned to see Lucia entering, her backpack slung over one shoulder. She had started coming to my store after discovering we carried several rare texts on Amazonian ecology that she needed for her research. Neither of us had planned this connection, but when she introduced herself that first day, I hadn't been able to turn her away. "Hi, Claire," she called, waving as she made her way through the shelves toward the staircase to the deck. Sorry I'm late. My sustainable development class ran over. No problem, I replied, setting out 2 cups of tea. I've been enjoying the view. Lucia settled into the chair across from me, accepting the tea gratefully. Dad called this morning, she said. He and Mom are thinking of coming for Thanksgiving. Would that be weird for you? I considered the question. Would it be weird to share a holiday meal with my formerly dead husband, his second wife, and the daughter who still didn't know I had once been married to her father? Absolutely. But in the past months, I had discovered resources of resilience I hadn't known I possessed. Not weird, I said finally. Just another chapter in our very unusual story. Lucia smiled, relieved. She still believed I was simply a bookstore owner who had befriended her family, a kind local showing hospitality to Brazilian transplants. Robert, Isabella, and I had agreed it wasn't our place to upend her world with the truth, at least not yet. Perhaps someday, when she was older, when the foundations of her identity were more firmly established. I brought you something, Lucia said, reaching into her backpack. She pulled out a small potted plant with delicate white flowers. It's a rare orchid native to the region where I grew up. Mom helped me smuggle it through customs. She grinned mischievously. Don't tell anyone. I took the plant, touched by the gesture. It's beautiful. Thank you. It's called a ghost orchid, she explained. They're almost impossible to find in the wild now. But they're survivors. They can go dormant for years when conditions aren't right, and then suddenly reappear when you least expect them. Like your father, I thought but didn't say. As Lucia chattered about her classes and her adjustment to Seattle, I studied her face, the perfect blend of Robert and Isabella. In another lifetime, she might have been my daughter. In this one, she was something else entirely, not quite a friend, not quite family, but a living bridge between what was lost and what remained. Later, after Lucia had left for an evening study group, I sat alone on the deck watching the sunset paint Elliott Bay in shades of gold and pink. My phone buzzed with a text from Robert. Lucia tells me she visited you today. Thank you for being kind to her. I typed back, she's remarkable. You and Isabella did well. 3 dots appeared as he typed a response. We're thinking of relocating to Seattle part-time. The Environmental Center has funding for a satellite office here. Would that be too difficult for you? 20 years ago, I had planted a garden around an empty grave, speaking my heart's secrets to a man who couldn't hear them. 3 months ago, I had discovered that everything I believed about my life was built on a foundation of half-truths and well-intentioned deceptions. Now I faced a future where my past had returned in an unrecognizable form, not the restoration I might once have dreamed of, but something new and undefined. I looked at the ghost orchid Lucia had given me, delicate, resilient, reappearing against all odds, and knew my answer. Not too difficult, I wrote back. Just a new chapter for all of us. I set down my phone and turned my face to the fading light. The man I had mourned had returned after 20 years with a wife I never knew. But in losing him twice, first to death, then to truth, I had finally found myself. The empty grave would always be part of my story, but it no longer defined my future. The ghost orchid glowed white in the gathering dusk, its petals open to whatever might come next.